I love tying Prusik knots like I love my wife. And I'm a good man. Let's talk about how to tie the Prusik. This is a super helpful knot that helps us, technically it's a hitch. We're connecting one line to another. This is super helpful for making things like a rope ladder, so that you are maybe on safety harness, but you get a second called a sender line, maybe into a tree for some tree work, and you quick tie this loop. So a light or medium duty line like this 550 paracord. This would be considered light duty as it's only 500 pounds test strength. And tie this with a double fisherman knot into just one kind of just big loop that uses up the entire length of the line, and it's adjustable. You can sort of gently ease the two fisherman knots apart from each other for very light duty use, like holding a Nalgene or something like that. Wrap this around the Nalgene and then adjust it so that it's nice and tight. These are basically paired fisherman's slip knots, and the two of them together slide past each other until you put tension on the loop. And let's see if we can get this on camera here. When you put tension on the loop, they act as stop knots for each other and pull tight without pulling through, capsizing. Okay, so we would use this shorter medium duty or light duty line or tied into a loop as a single rung on the ladder, or a foot loop, like a stirrup. And then using the Prusik knot, we'll attach this light or medium duty loop onto a heavier duty line, a working line, that is going to get you up into the tree. The idea being that you stick your foot in this loop and then hoist yourself up kind of one step with your leg. And then once you've hoisted yourself up, you pull the pressure off of this loop onto some other part of your rig or harness, and then you can slide the Prusik knot loop up the line and then make another step. And the whole process takes a second to set up, but once you do that, you basically step, hoist, slide, step, hoist, slide, and then in less than a minute, you're well up into the tree. Pretty cool. It's about as hard as climbing a ladder in terms of exertion and effort. Not so bad. All right, so let's talk about how to do this. This will be our line that is maybe even obligated at both ends. So through an anchoring or belay system at the bottom end, let's say, or maybe just loose, typically loose. And then the far end, like way up in the tree, we've got this looped over a safe fork in the tree, and we'll use this line to climb up as we go. But hauling ourselves up hand over hand along the line would be exhausting. We can't keep that up day in, day out. But our leg muscles are big enough to hoist us up into the tree fairly efficiently if they have something they can push off of. And they're going to push off of the stirrup, basically, where we're going to create out of this lighter line. Okay, so follow the other video for how to turn a short segment of medium duty line into a loop using a pair of fisherman's knots. And then with the other line slung up into the tree, put the fisherman knot section sort of up and out of the way, and just drape it sort of perpendicular across your working line, or the standing line that you're going to use to ascend into the tree. Take the non-knotted end, the far end of our loop line, after you've laid it across the ascending line, and we're just going to wrap this around the ascender line three times, typically 3 times at a minimum. And more than that, the friction on the Prusik starts to get a little bit harder to manage. Less than 3 wraps, and it's going to be harder for your stirrup line to grip onto your ascender line. And when you try to push off it to step up further into the tree, then this might slide down just a little bit. Okay? So lay the loop that you've created with a pair of fisherman's knots across the ascender line, and then The ascender line's not really going to do anything else at this point. It's just going to sort of be there, ready for us to climb up it. Take the loop line and wrap it under. And pull through. We're going to wrap this a couple of times, about 3 times typically. Wrap it over to make 1 full loop. And what you'll see is we're going to create a coil above where we're tying the prusik, and we're going to create a second parallel coil, but mirrored below where we're tying the prusik. All right, this is our first wrap out of 3. So there's 1, and then 2, first half of the 2. Here's our second wrap. Now we've got 2 full coils, 1 above and 1 below where we're tying the prusik. And then pick up the whole thing, flip that little bit of loop underneath the ascender line once more, pull it around one last time. Now we got 3 coils, which looks like 4 wraps, but it's 3 full wraps. So 1, 2, 3 full wraps above, and 1, 2, 3 full wraps below. Cool. This is about where we want to be. We'll give it 1 more flip so that this little loop here that we've been sort of passing over and under the ascender line is kind of facing in the direction of where we have our fisherman's knots sort of helpfully out of the way. And then once we've got this all set right here, okay, so 3 coils, little loop, 3 coils, and the ascender line. Now we just take that fisherman's knot, that double fisherman's knot that we created separately, and pass that under and through that little loop that we left between our 3 coils, and just pull it through. This doesn't feel much like a knot because it's not. It's a lashing, right? Lashings connect, it's a hitch. Hitches connect one line to another, and that's what we're doing. So we've still got those 3 wraps above, 3 wraps below. We haven't passed anything of the ascender line. It's just here. It's just something to wrap around. And then we've pulled the double fisherman's knots through the little bit of loop. Okay, now I clean this gently to kind of make sure those coils are nice and good to go. And it's actually kind of a beautiful knot in its way. Here's the thing. When we don't have tension on the blue line here, in this case our stirrup loop or our stair-step loop, those coils slide along the ascender line up or down very, very easily. I'm using 2 fingers, no strength involved. Very, very quick, very low wear on the sheath of either your stirrup loop or the ascender line. That's a good thing. But when we put tension on the stirrup loop, like we string a foot through there and we're using it to step up and hoist our body and our gear up into the tree along the ascender line, well, what that's going to do is essentially torque the line and our Prusik hitch. So when there's not tension on the Prusik, it will not have any problem sliding up and down the line. Okay? Very easy, no wear and tear or minimal wear and tear on the sheath or casing of the ascender line and on the stirrup line. This is good. This lets you use your gear longer, safer. Very easy. A couple of fingers is all the strength you need to move this up and down the line when there's no tension on the stirrup or stair-step loop. On the other hand, once we put some tension on the stirrup loop, like we put a foot through that, then all of a sudden the ascender line bends a little bit between the two sets of wraps in the Prusik knot, the Prusik hitch, and the harder I pull, the better it does at resisting trying to pull down the line and slip. So now I can put my full body weight on this stirrup loop here and push myself, my gear, lunch, my pole saw, chainsaw, what have you, all my personal protective equipment. I might be 300-400 pounds on that line on a bad day. I can hoist that up with the biggest muscles in my body, my legs, my hammies, and glutes and stuff like that, and erector spinae, and then put our weight off of this, slide it very gently and easily, no pressure, up the line, one step distance, maybe a foot or two, and then put our weight back on that foot in the stirrup, this blue line, and hoist everything up another step. So it's slide, transfer weight, hoist up, pushing against this stirrup, pushing upward against it, slide, hoist up, push upward against the stirrup. So this is a way to basically ratchet your way up into a tree with working with your physiology, working with the kinesiology of how your body wants to exert. If you're trying to pull yourself up into a tree for tree work or what have you, using your arms, that's going to be exhausting very quickly. So rock climbers, professional tree care workers, they learn to use their legs for keeping motion sustainable. It brings it out of anaerobic exertion into something a little bit closer to walking. A lot easier on your body, a lot easier on your gear. Okay? So let's retie this Prusik knot. After having assumed that we're going to have the double fisherman knot that turns this stirrup line into the stirrup loop. That's a separate video, double fisherman knot. Okay. Now, this is a good working knot, so it's non-binding. We basically just, to untie it, pull the fisherman knot back through the little loop that was left over, creating the wraps earlier. And then the whole thing just comes apart. There's no binding knot to get frustrated with. There's no binding knot to chew on the fibers and the strength and the safety of your line. Okay, so let's assume that we have this ascender line up into a tree and anchored safely and securely onto the tree. And we've just finished tying a medium-duty line. It can be smaller diameter as long as the test weight, test strength is plenty high enough, like multiples of your body plus gear plus everything weight. And we've just taken a short section of that. This one's about 3 feet long. You probably could use half of that just fine. And tied a pair of fisherman's knots such that they form the whole line into a loop. And for lighter duty stuff than this, those can slide past each other to adjust the size of the loop for gripping and Nalgene or something like that. But for us, we're going to want the full strength of each of those fisherman knots working as a stop knot for the other so that the loop can't pull free. All right, so we'll take this and we'll set that part of the loop up and away from, it's off camera here, but up and away from our ascending line. And then at the very far end of the loop for our stirrup loop, just lay it over the ascender and wrap that little bit of loop once, there's one time, and then 2 times, and then 3 times fully around. I'll try and keep this all sort of together here. Okay. And then 1/2 wrap again, so you have 3 complete loops. And that's about right for friction on one of these. You can always do more if you want. More wraps, that is. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 wraps on one side, 1, 2, 3 wraps mirroring on the other side, and a small kind of open loop left over. we're going to take our fisherman knot, double fisherman knots at the far end of this stirrup loop line, and feed it through the bottom of this little blue eyelet here. Okay, so reach off camera, grab that double fisherman knot that turns this line into one big loop, and then feed that from the underside up through the little open loop that you had left after creating those wraps. And just pull the thing gently to clean it. All right, so pull on the stirrup loop in the direction of where you're going to be stepping your foot into that loop eventually. And you get a pretty little Prusik hitch. And again, the beauty of this is that it will slide easily up and down the line. And when you put your weight on it, like putting your foot in the loop and stepping on the loop like a stirrup, then what we'll see happen is the ascender line will bend very slightly, kind of in between these two, as we pull sideways on the Prusik. Our body weight kind of pulls sideways on it here. And you see we get kind of a bend in the ascender line just right there. And it's just enough friction that we can put our body weight on it, hoist everything up a step, and then ease that pressure, shift our body weight elsewhere, maybe onto the harness instead of onto the stirrup that we've just done. And then with a free hand, gently slide that Prusik line on up, and then step, hoist everything up into the tree, another foot or two, and gently slide, hoist. But the harder you pull and put your weight and trust your stirrup loop, the more it puts that little bend or kink, that S shape, into the ascender line, and the better friction stops that loop from slipping. So when you trust your rig, it works better. Okay, and again, it's a non-binding working knot, professional knot, the Prusik. So to untie it, we just feed this double fisherman knot end of the loop on the stirrup back the way it came through our little open loop, and the whole thing, you just see it kind of unwraps itself for us. Very handy. Okay, that is a Prusik knot. Very, very useful.